and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we get to the heart of international, national, and local political matters in a reasoned, balanced, and fair way. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. Good evening, Ian. It's been a bit of a strange week.
Well, they say a week is a long time in politics, do they not? And what a long week it was, and Thursday in particular was extraordinarily long for both of us and for many of the candidates as well, as the toughest job interview in the world came to a conclusion at around 3 o'clock in the morning for most of the candidates.
Yes, it did. So we're doing our review today of the results that took place on Thursday night or Friday morning, more accurately. So we'll break those down, look at the 2026 local elections, the winners and the losers, and the surprises in Portsmouth, and what that means for what that could mean for the future of the city, and also obviously the change that the spoiler alert, the change. Well, it doesn't change who's in control of the council, but it does change. Um, well,
Oh,
the
talk
setup of
about
that. I've fluffed that,
Well,
haven't I? Completely.
talk about going for the big reveal early. If our listenership and watchers drop now, you'll know that it's entirely your fault at this point.
It,
So
it was. It was entirely
yeah,
my fault. But while I fluff that up, do please remember to give us a like, follow, a comment, or subscribe on YouTube, and the links are in the chat of the different ways you can watch us if you'd rather watch us vertically or if you'd rather watch us horizontally, whichever takes your fancy. But do
I
so.
think in I think in both of those instances, it's important to point out it's the picture on the screen rather than the
Yes.
orientation of the person watching. So
Yes. We're not going to
yes,
change our orientations.
no. So it had been a well anticipated election. I guess if we look at the mechanics of the night,
Hmm.
we had been, because for this is probably the one time a year where Simon and I are almost treated as if we are genuine media types. So thank you to Portsmouth Democratic Services, who once again invited us in, gave us our little cosy booth at the back of the hall, so we could watch out over the count happening live. Um, with Simon's highly sophisticated audio visual system, to let break the fourth wall and let you in. I believe the visuals were prepared with a camera on a monopole held in place with a bungee cord. And in the end, did you have to deploy the highly technical hat stuffed down the back of the seat to hold it all rigid?
Well, yeah, the monopole was lashed with a bungee cord to the arm of a chair, and in order to get the angle right, or at least completely less pissed, um, I basically wedged something in there to basically create
Yeah,
the right angle, and the thing that I found was a hat.
excellent.
So
Yeah.
we're nothing if not
It's
inventive. We did have a couple of tech issues with the connection on the night. So apologies that we lost the people that were watching on Facebook, but the stream did continue on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. But yes, it was definitely an interesting night. I mean, I didn't even get to the box of a mixture of Haribo wine gums and various different things and Tang Fastics that I'd brought along, let alone the apple cereal bar and crisps. So
Yeah, and to be fair, it's one of those things. For those who have never attended a count, it's a strange night because we had been given the tip off that the first result was expected around 1 o'clock,
mhm.
and we should all be done and dusted by 3. But I think we realised fairly early on that that wasn't going to be the case,
Yeah,
because the first stage is verification, where they empty the boxes out from each of the polling stations and check that the number of ballots in the box is the same as the number of ballot papers that have been handed out. So what that gives you and what it gave us on the night was that as people were opening ballots, I think there was a general understanding, from a couple of people who came to speak to us, that turnout looked like it was very high.
Yes, I mean, we'll speak to this when we go through the numbers, but turnout seemed to be up pretty much across the city, more so in some areas than others. But that certainly scuppered any plans of getting the first result out by 1 o'clock and getting us out the door by three. That wasn't going to happen.
And then again, having been there before, what usually happens is there's a kind of MC on stage who's kind of calling everything out. And
Hmm.
what we expected to hear was a series of the candidates and their agents called through to adjudicate on the spoiled ballot papers, which is where creative types have added messages of hope and sincerity, or spoiled the ballot, or done
Or they've
something.
let loose their inner Banksy.
Exactly. And then what usually then happens is some little time later, they're called forward for a provisional result, and then fairly soon after that, they leap up on stage, and we get the formal "I, Agamemnon Disraeli III, Julia's returning officer, do hereby state the number of votes as cast." Um, but it was a weird one this year because that's kind of what happened for Cosham. Um, and we got Cosham, I wouldn't say fairly early, but
Hmm.
We got Cosham in the routine manner, and then nothing until it felt like about 3 o'clock in the morning, where suddenly everyone was called forward and we got result after result after result. So it was all a bit frantic towards the end of the evening, which meant we were struggling for guests because
Yeah,
no
there
one
wasn't
really
really any
wanted to.
time for anyone to come and talk to us.
Exactly.
And then once the last one was done, pretty much everyone was getting out the door as quick as they could.
Well,
So what we have lined up is next Sunday. And normally we'd kind of go on a break straight after the count live stream. But we thought we'd do a results show, and the next Sunday we're going to interview council leader Steve Pitt. So it'll be interesting to hear from him how the kind of the flow of the night went. But yes, it was certainly um, a bit confusing at first. Paul Cosham as an outlier, all on its own, and then basically not very much being reported. We didn't hear reports of recounts, but it seems that some actually did happen. Not necessarily full recounts, perhaps actually just bundle counts, and then kind of just getting to the points of actually announcing the results. The kind of clue that might have been going on was that the announcements of candidates to meet and to review the provisional result. Obviously, if one of the candidates doesn't like the provisional result and requests or their agent requests a recount, then that's what's happened, and that might have been kind of part of the day. But once the buses start arriving, they all started arriving at pretty much the same time in quick succession. So fair play to the guys of Democratic Services at their council, pretty much moving that straight through it in clockwork style once they started coming through. So
per-
shall we start
let's
having a look
dive
at some
in.
numbers?
Let's start at the very beginning. Oh, and if we go alphabetically, as I presume you will have done, being an ordered and structured man.
Yes, I tend to put things, or try to put things in an order. So yeah, let's go kind of straight to Baffins and see what
which
we had. Oh, sorry, gone.
which was one of the very last wards to
Yes.
be declared, and this is one where we kind of suspected that a recount had probably taken place. So, give us the Baffin's result.
So the Baffin's result was that Abdul Qadir, the Liberal Democrat incumbent, was re-elected with 2,100 votes and 40% of the share. But in second place with 2,015 votes, so we're only 85 votes in it, with 38% of the vote was Reform's Darren Surley. Um, the Greens in third, with Labour in fourth, and the Conservatives in fifth. So those of you following on the video, you can see from the chart there, you've got the reform result actually just as a dot there, because that's the first time that there's actually been a Reform candidate standing. You've got the black line there is showing actually the Portsmouth Independence Party's votes previously there, but actually as a Reform candidate, that was the first time there'd been a Reform candidate in that ward. So to go as a first time out straight into second place with only 85 votes in it, that's quite a leap in.
Well, a very very strong performance. I mean, Baffin's is a ward that we've looked at kind of it's always been one that that that's always kind of looked slightly odd in terms of the fact that it is a Lib Dem stronghold with three candidates in there. There's always been a the Conservatives targeted it for many years, and
Mm.
Terry Norton for Baffins became Terry Norton for um, Drayton and Farlington as a Conservative, and Joe for Baffins became Joe for Paulsgrove, and both have now were the turquoise of light blue. Um, I guess perhaps not a surprise. I think a couple of years ago, Paul Oakley Cleef, who stood for the Portsmouth Independence Party, came second.
Hmm.
And so I think this is one where I think when we did our predictions, this was one where did I think that Lib Dems would still hold it?
We
Well,
both had this as Lib Dems.
yeah, touch and go. But I guess this is the picture we'll see
Mm.
across the city. So a great result for the Lib Dems to
Mm.
hold that one.
The
Again, a very good result
mm.
for Reform.
Yeah, the comment of note there in 2024, the turnout was just under 28.5. Sorry, 28%, and on Thursday it was 47%.
Yeah, and
So
that's incredible. I mean
yeah.
one thing this election has shown, and it will do is we'll clip through some of the others a bit
Hmm.
quicker than this, but is that you know people are tired of politics. Well, I think this election showed that people aren't as tired of politics. These were the sort of numbers you tend to see for a general election rather than a local council. So
Mm.
so yeah, let's go to Charles
Eh,
Dickens.
Central.
Central South Sea. I can never get this. Is why you do it. So Central South Sea.
Hmm. So in Central Southsea, so the incumbent was George Fielding from of Labour, but the winner on the night was Kate Dorrington from the Lib Dems with 1,996 votes, 43% share. With the second place being the Green candidate Lucy Bridgewater at 978 votes, with Labour pushed into third with 856. So
Mm.
um, quite an interesting Reform, only 14% of the vote there. Conservatives distant 4%. So quite an interesting. Um, I think probably a national impact on the support for the Labour Party there. There's in the recent years those um, watching on the stream can see from the graph that there's quite a tussle between the Lib Dems and between Labour, usually in this ward well, up until Thursday, two Labour councillors and one Lib Dem councillor.
Mm.
Now that's the other way round. But Labour's vote share dropping so much that actually the Greens, with quite clearly, looks like that a lot of that support shifted to the Greens.
And I think this is where when we talk about local elections and local councillors, this one is the first one that we've shown, but it shows you just what's happened to Labour's vote on the night. It absolutely collapsed, and good, strong, hard-working local councillors, decent people. We might not agree with them politically, but wearing a red rosette on Thursday was not helpful for your political cause. And, I think in Central South Sea, which has always had a very strong Labour following, you can see where the Greens, uh, you know, came from, I don't wish to be disrespectful, effectively nowhere to
Hmm.
second place. That that strikes me as a lot of Labour supporters who have turned their back on the party and headed to the Greens.
Yeah, indeed. But when you, I mean, if you look back into the distant past, even in 2021, the Conservative vote wasn't getting past 600, and Reform came straight in there. The first time there was a Reform candidate in Central South Sea with 661 votes.
Yeah, I know. I think that, this is the element, isn't it,
Mm,
of local versus national, and it is very clear that Reform and a lot of their campaigning, um, even though we discussed this with George Madgwick, and he was adamant that a lot of their campaign had been about local issues, particularly in our ward of Cosham, that I would say, probably three-quarters of the leaflets they dropped through my door were about national issues. And I think that they, Reform very strongly have motivated you know, a segment of the electorate to come out and vote. And I think if you look at the green kind of rise in Central South Sea, which I don't think was replicated across the whole of even the South, um, but here it was very strong, and you've got to think that unfortunately the national picture cost George Fielding his job, and I think if we now flip on to Charles Dickens, we'll see something similar but a different outcome.
yes. So switching onto the other side of the city to Charles Dickens. Sorry. By the way, just before so the turnout, by the way, sorry, in Central went from just under 30% in 2024 to just under 39% on Tuesday. Tuesday,
Yeah,
Thursday.
Thursday, so up by a third again, perhaps not
Mm.
as strong as Baffin's, but again
Another
a
9 percentage points increase. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah. So sorry, Charles Dickens. So in Charles Dickens, so Sam Coupland from Reform won, as far as I can recall, a first-time candidate. Apologies
yes,
if we've got that wrong.
yeah,
So 993 votes, 30% vote share. The Lib Dems coming in second in 906 votes with 27%. With the incumbent Yinka Adeniran sadly also um, taking the dent from the national picture into third place in 697 with 21%. The Conservatives a distant 5% with the Greens. Elliot Lee at 562 votes at 17%. So quite a quite a change in fortune there. Again, it's the first time a Reform candidate stood in that ward, and the dip. Sorry, excuse me. The dip in the Labour vote historically over the last four elections, that's been a solid Labour ward. Although to be fair, in the slightly more medium history, not all of those people elected as Labour candidates have remained as Labour candidates for one reason or another. But nonetheless, that was a theme that Yinka broke, but yeah. So reform taking that one, but with the tussle really then around a different second with Labour dropping to third.
yeah. I think this would. I mean, this is. I mean, this is the first bellwether of this one shows just how badly things have gone for Labour, because Charles Dickens has been a Labour ward.
Mm,
If you go back to Stephen Morgan MP was also he was a councillor here at the same time as being an MP. I guess the only thing for those of you who really do have a strong interest in local political history is back in 2014. Um, I Charles Dickens had a couple of UKIP councillors, so obviously Reform coming from that same stable. Um, but again, not to underestimate or downplay, um, because this isn't an area where PIP, were strong to lay the foundations for
mm.
reform. Um, we've always argued that if you can get the electorate out, anybody can get the electorate out in Charles Dickens, they could win the ward. So fair play to Reform for winning their first seat in the South.
Yeah, it's often commented as a ward that's very very difficult to campaign in because There's lots of residents that are behind access doors that you can't gain access to either leaflet or to canvas. There's also lots of blocks of flats. There's also quite a transient population. They have quite a turnover because quite a lot of the student accommodation is within the ward. So there's also then that quite a regular turnover. But historically, Charles Dickens is the ward with the lowest turnout in the city. In 2024, it was just under 15%. But on Thursday, it was 23.1%. So for them, that's quite a that's that's what, up by more than 50%.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. It's still, it is still disappointing that
Mm,
that's still only about half of what a lot of other wards in the city got. But you're starting from a low base, and to increase it by 50%,
mm.
it feels like people were motivated to go out. Word for the Lib Dems there, from a standing start to get within less than 100 votes, as pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think the year that Stephen Morgan won it as a councillor, the person that he the incumbent, sorry, that he won against, there was a Lib Dem incumbent. So it has a history over time of kind of changing hands. It's just in the more recent history has been more red, but time will tell whether that turns into a more of a turquoise thing or not. And we did have a comment in the chat, so thank you, Elliot, for confirming. Elliot has confirmed that there was a bundle check for Charles Dickens.
Yes.
So for those, when we talk about a bundle check, so when there's a request for a recount, there's either a full recount, essentially you rerun counting putting into piles every single ballot and going through those, but they're normally put into bundles. I might be wrong, so someone please correct me. They're put into kind of bundles of 50, and the bundle check is just checking that the bundles. You're essentially just counting up the number of bundles and any odds, just to see whether that's the case. The potential there is if the ballot that's on the top of the bundle is actually candidate A, and actually all the other ones are actually candidate B, then that bundle is being counted against the wrong candidate. So that would kind of explain things there, and indeed the numbers there being so close.
Yep.
87
Yep.
in it there. So yeah, that was another tight one. So where to next?
Gosham.
Okay, so we're going to skip Copner, or are we? Sorry, that was unfair. Well, let's do Copner. Um, so Copner. Oh, sorry. Let me just change my graphic. So Copner. We had Carl Inman from Reform winning with 38% of the vote, 1,616. The incumbent was Ben Swan from the Conservatives, 1,095, so 26% of the vote. The Greens and the Lib Dems at 12% of the votes, so 520 and 500. And Labour in fifth at 478 votes there. So yeah, that's been quite a. It was historically a Conservative ward, but Portsmouth Independence Party had made serious inroads in there and had two councillors. Those two councillors then have moved over to Reform. So now that's a Reform full house for Copner.
Yeah, and I think, whilst it was a terrible night for Labour, it definitely was not a good night for the Conservatives. You've seen that's their support falling across the north of the city over the last probably 4 years. And unfortunately for Ben Swan, who is a friend of the pod and a really hard-working local councillor, in the same style as George and Yinka suffered for wearing a red rosette.
Mm-hmm.
Ben was, Ben's Conservative rosette didn't help him here, and I think this is a ward that Reform were very, very keen to win, and I think probably expected to win. So not a massive surprise on the night.
No. One thing I did kind of notice is that some of the Conservative candidates described themselves as local Conservatives, and
I think they,
others,
I
that was
think
just an
most
admin
did.
thing.
Yeah, I think most did. I think
Mm.
I think there is an element of it's so difficult because as we see in this election, the colour of the rosette you wear,
Mm,
um, doesn't necessarily influence or has a significant influence on how many votes you get. And if we look before the poll, we would have identified, I think we could identify councillors from all parties who we would consider to be good, hard-working councillors
mm,
for their local election, for the local electorate, and many of those will lose their seat because of the party that they purport to,
mm.
rather than you know
But
and interestingly, and he's published it publicly.
mm,
Ben Swan could still be Cocknor councillor today, as he was invited to defect to Reform, and he's put that in the public domain that
hmm
that wasn't for him,
no,
but still would have been the same Ben Swan
yes,
working for his local people. They're just wearing a different rosette. So
yeah, indeed. But it's an interesting choice. Obviously, others have made different calculations when that conversation's taken place. Sorry, the point I was making was that it seems in the Portsmouth North wards, the Conservative candidates have been described as local Conservatives, and in Portsmouth South, if I just flick back to Charles Dickens, the candidate there was called the Conservative Party candidate. I don't think that's a deliberate distinction between the two in the set, other than essentially whoever's filled in their paperwork has filled them in slightly. They've been done slightly differently in the two wards. Perhaps someone from the Conservative parties in Portsmouth would be able to explain what kind of went on. But that was interesting because on the council's results page, it listed them out as two different parties because they're a different
ah,
name. So
interesting.
when they were reporting the percentages there, it's not quite. So I've assumed that they are actually the same party, and it wasn't intentional that they had a slightly different name. So
Right.
that was the point I was trying to kind of get to there.
Okay.
Just quickly on turnout on Copner before we do indeed move to Cosham. So 2024 the turnout was 29%, but on Thursday it was 43.5%.
That's again up by about 50%. So again, another strong turnout.
Yes. So another
And
strong. So we both called Copner right. I think Charles Dickens in our predictions. Um, was that the one? I can't. No, I think was that the one that I can't remember. But I think Charles Dickens. We both had as reform. But yeah, let's move on to merry old Cosham, shall we? Let's dip off the island for a second. Still part of Portsmouth, just to clarify.
yeah,
Um,
no, nothing
so
exclusive.
Cosham. So Lamara Fudge for Reform, 1,881 votes with 42% share. Ashkar Shah for Labour, who was the incumbent, 1,747, so 39% vote share. So again, kind of relatively close. Alex de Olivia Martins for the Greens, 425, 10%, which is quite an improvement on what they'd got in previous years, and indeed Tim Suffolk for the Lib Dems, 374, 8%. That was an increase on 2024, but again in Cosham, the history was there was a PIP candidate elected in 2024, but they were one of the ones that has also moved over to Reform. So it's now one Labour and two Reform.
If you were Shah, you'd be raging. You'd be absolutely raging and so frustrated, I think, because if you look at the Cosham ward,
Mm.
no Conservative because of an administrative blunder. So, where did those votes go? You know, and you can't presume they all went to Reform because they may not have
No,
done. But it would not have helped him. If you look at the Greens, another 400 votes there. Um, and if you look at Shah's personal vote, I don't think you will see another Labour candidate with 1,000 votes. Now, I'm doing this from memory, so I might be proved wrong as we go through. But the fact that he got 1,700 people prepared to turn out and vote for him and fell just short, with the influence of the Greens and no Conservative, he must be raging, I would think.
Yeah,
He's not a raging sort of man, but
no,
but but
but you can kind of feel the what ifs, the sliding doors moment of how
yeah,
different would this result have been had Lee Mason's nomination not been rejected. So that's why there was no Conservative. I mean, interestingly, again, from the graph, the Conservative vote has pretty much been a downward slope in this ward since 2021. But yeah, what we'll never know, obviously, is how many of those votes would have still gone Conservative, and whether that would have changed results had had it been a different situation. But I think it was this year and in 2024 that the Greens were standing candidates across the city.
yeah.
I think prior to that they weren't standing candidates in every ward, and indeed actually prior to this year, Reform actually only stood candidates in two wards. I think in the locals. So so again, no previous Reform history in Cosham. So to go from that to take the ward again, that's quite a result, and we both disagreed on how that would turn out. So you predicted the result that turned out, and I predicted that Shah would sneak through. Although that was before the calamity with the nomination papers was revealed, because we did the predictions in February, which is quite early. But yeah, that was Cosham. Turnout 2024 was 30.1%. Turnout 43.8% on Thursday.
So another one with a third up, and if I've got this one right, it's Drayton and Farlington.
Um, it is indeed. Yeah. So Drayton and Farlington next. So here we had the leader of the Conservative group on Portsmouth City Council, Simon Bosher, fighting to hold his seat, which he did. 1,841 with 36% of the vote. But Stephen Burt from Reform, 1,817 votes. So I think this is the closest ward across the city.
Definitely.
Labour coming in third. So Matthew Holland for the Labour group. So Simon and Matthew both took part in our online hustings. 648, so 13%. The Greens and the Lib Dems at 8%. So historically, this used to essentially be joked about as the ward where the Conservatives weighed their vote rather than counted it. A
Yep.
tighter fight this time round, but one where the Conservative vote has held up, and indeed over time it looks like the vote share was decreasing, but actually the vote share this year, also the number of votes, is actually it is a good 350 up on what it was in 2024 for the Conservatives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was the one ray of light for the Conservatives on what was a pretty bruising evening. I think
Mm-hmm.
Simon, I think Simon was very great in his acceptance speech, starting his 25th year as a councillor, and he came and spoke to us.
Mm.
You know, I don't think I, I don't think he actually expected to win this. I think he hoped to, and he hoped that his work in the ward had paid off. And yeah, I think great result for him personally. And yeah, but yeah, 27 votes makes all the difference. Every vote really does count. And I'd
Mm.
like to think that those 27 were entirely due to the Pompey Politics podcast hustings, and let that be a lesson to every candidate that didn't come and talk to us when they're
Okay,
there.
not that we're biased in any way. Turnout in 2024 was just a shade over 35%. On Thursday, it was just it was 49.5%. So again, another kind of 14-15% percentage points increase in the turnout. Let's go back down south and have a look at Eastleigh and Cranes Water.
Yep.
So E&C, so incumbent Matthew Winnington for the Lib Dems retaining his seat with 1,900 votes, 41%. John Hill for Reform coming in second at 1,117 to 24%. The Greens taking third there, 619 with 13%. The Conservatives taking fourth with 551 and 12%. And Labour 472 with 10%, and the Heritage Party with 23. So from a no candidates previously and Reform, that's a strong second to the. There's usually in more kind of medium distance past, it was a bit of a tussle between Conservative and Lib Dem here. Recently, that's just turned out to be a tussle between Labour and the Lib Dems, but with the Lib Dems managing to beat Labour, but the Labour vote is less than half what it was in 2024 here,
Yeah.
with the Greens seeming to benefit from that.
Yeah, and I think we won't dwell too long on this one, but I
Mm-hmm.
think the illustration here is that this was a ward that showed that the Lib Dems in the south were their vote not only was holding up but growing. John Hill, very respectable performance for Reform, but ultimately the Lib Dem vote staying strong in ENF.
Yeah. Turnout 2024, just a shave under 38%. And on Thursday it was 48.6%. So again, an increase, but not as much as some of the other wards that we were looking at. But yeah, again another kind of interesting night from a national impact and how that was working out.
Fratton.
Yes, so Fratton, and we both predicted E&C to be to say Lib Dem. So in Fratton, I think so. I predicted a Lib Dem win. I think you predicted a Reform
I think I
gain.
did in this
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
So the Lib Dems won this 1,518 with 39%. So that was Billy Ansell. In second place, Jacob Short for Reform, 1,162, so 30%, with the Greens in 14%. Lay the incumbent Tom Coles for Labour down into fourth place with 12% of the vote, 454 votes, and the Conservatives a fifth with 5%. So again, a national picture kind of dent there from we've had Tom's been on the podcast a couple of times, and has and also took part in our multi ward online hustings. Yeah, unfortunately, kind of that seemingly dent in the Labour vote there, seemingly going towards the Greens.
Yeah, we
But
had
with the Lib Dems really pushing up their vote, nearly doubling their vote against 2024 to take the ward.
Yeah, I mean, we had an informal conversation at our informal interview station, which was just outside the gents' toilets, with Tom early in the evening. And Tom's a kind of philosophical guy and is very reasonable. And he kind of did I think I'm fourth. And like, no. And he said, yeah, I think so. He said it's looking like an absolute disaster for Labour. He said, well, I've had 8 good years. I enjoyed being Lord Mayor. I've had a
Mm,
fantastic time, but looks like the electorate have spoken. And I think this is one where, I know predicted Reform would win it. Jacob Short has been campaigning, probably in the ward now for 4 or 5 years, very
mm,
actively. Um, Quite a protege for Pip, and obviously, has followed the path to Reform. And yeah, I thought this was going to be his year, but it looks, again, this was another case of the Lib Dem vote in the south, where they've already got a foothold. For me, this was the one where, and you called it, they strengthened that position and won the ward, which yeah, I was surprised at, and
yeah,
I
and
think Reform will be both surprised and disappointed that they didn't win this one.
I think they quite possibly did expect, after many years of coming so very close. I mean, in 2024, um, there were three parties within 100 votes of each other, between the Lib Dems, between PIP as they were standing as then, and Labour. But unfortunately, yeah, this wasn't Jacob's year. 2024, the turnout was 24.6%. Thursday, it was 36.2%. So again, up,
Wow.
but not up as much as some of the other wards there. Yeah, we'd predicted different conclusions on this one. And I just mentioned, thank you, Tim, for the correction. We had both predicted correctly. Charles Dickens. I think that we both got one each wrong.
Right.
And in your case that was Fratton, and in my case that was Cosham. So, which is also the tightest I think we've both ever been on actually our predictions. So that was interesting. So yeah, Fratton. That's Fratton.
Yep.
So should we move on to Hilsey?
Yeah, not much to say about it. Is there? Read the numbers out.
Yeah. So with Hilsey, oh sorry, just a second. I've just lost my. In a second. I just seem to have lost the screen. So I'll go off of what's on the graph there. So reform, in probably not really a surprise to anybody, taking that with 2067. Although previously in the medium distance had been a conservative stronghold, PIP had really shocked the conservative Fortress Hillsey, and taken that for PIP, and then with all of those PIP councillors going over to reform, and again. Russell Simpson again getting re-elected with 2067 votes, with with basically with very distant
Yeah,
competition. The next was less than 600 votes. So
yeah,
never really kind of in the in any form of doubt. And
yeah.
nearly what is it? Nearly, quite a significant increase on the previous vote, nearly double. So
Yeah, I think if you look at this one, Simon, you can look at it.
mm,
Look, Russell is a very strong, very visible, very active local councillor.
yeah,
So he's going to benefit from the reform effect. He's going to benefit from his hard work previously. No way he was going to lose this one. In the interest of time, let's
yeah,
rattle on.
yeah, 49% of the vote share. So quite a convincing win. But just very quickly, interestingly, the Greens in second place on 14%, and Labour on 13% in third. So the Conservatives actually fifth. So for a ward they used to basically own, that's quite a significant change. So I've got my other screen back. Turnout 27% in 2024, 41.7% in 2026.
Up by 50%. So yeah, good to see people motivated to vote.
Yeah, indeed. So moving quickly on, so to Milton. The incumbent here, of course, was council leader Steve Pipp, for the Lib Dems. And the Lib Dems winning here, Steve, with 2,233 votes, so 46% of the vote share. So again, a significant increase in what it achieved in 2022. But with Reform taking second place at 1,273, so 26%. The Greens in third place. Previously, it stood repeatedly under Labour, Paul Ryan Savage, but now standing under the green flag, 16% of the votes in third. So again, quite a stonking validation there for the Lib Dems. But Reform had previously stood in 2023 and 24 in the ward, but come in basically under 250 votes, and to come from there up to 1,273 is again still quite a turnaround for them. Turnout 27, and now 45.7%, so 46%.
Yeah,
So massive
I,
increase there.
I think Steve's got to be very pleased with that
Yeah.
result. Again, we thought when we analysed it that Paula, and with her local kind of recognisability, might take a chunk out of Steve's vote. But quite a comprehensive win for Steve, and endorsement of his leadership of the council, I guess. So Milton to Nelson.
Indeed. So Nelson being a point of contention because this was where the incumbent was Jason Fazakerley, so who was elected as a Lib Dem and then moved to Reform. Um, Nelson has returned Liberal Democrat Steve Andrews, so 1,499 to 41%, with Jason Fazakerley under the Reform banner 1,350. So still a kind of close race there with 37%, with the Greens in third, Labour in fourth, and the Conservatives in fifth there. So it, yeah, again, a large increase. More than I don't think about 50% increase in the number of votes for the Lib Dems. So that turnout going from 27% to 35.7%. Again, that
Uh,
seems to have brought people out on more than one side.
Well, and this is one where I think we both got this right, and I think we both got it right for the right reasons, which is that Jason Fazakerley, a lot of local recognition, a Lib Dem strong ward, but you
Mm,
you could have argued that the fact that he was already known as a councillor, and with the reform effect, this would have seen him over the line. And I think this is one that, again, I think reform locally would have expected, hoped, probably too weak a word, expected maybe too strong. But I think this is one that they would have been disappointed not to win.
yeah, I think perhaps they were thinking that was going to go their way. Whether, of course, that factored in Jason's decision to move to Reform, we'll never know. But it was an interesting one. The next one, Paulsgrove, probably not so much of a shock there. But I think so. Joe Standen being re-elected, so having been appointed in a by-election in October, being reappointed with 1,963 votes, so 58% of the vote share. So this ward, medium history, used to be a Conservative stronghold with all three. Those have all gone PIP, and then actually moved over to Reform. So a clear distance between even
Oh,
the Conservative vote down, at 14%, so 467. So again, Thomas Hall from the Conservatives taking part in our multi-ward hustings there. But there's just a sea between Reform, what was previously the PIP candidates, and now Reform.
yeah.
There's an ocean between them and anyone else, basically.
And which, yeah, and I think in this ward, no one expected anything other than
No.
this. It's a multicoloured ward, in fact that it's had a position where, at one point it was all Labour, at one point I believe it was all UKIP, then it went all Conservative, then all PIP, and now it's all Reform. So Paulsgrove goes all in with Port Solent and Wimmering, and on who they're going to back. So
Mm.
congratulations to Joe for a stonking win.
Yeah. So turnout 2024 was 24.2%, and turnout on Thursday 34.4%. So again, an increase, but not as much
Yeah,
as some of the other wards. But I don't think anybody was surprised that this was the way this one went, and that's the way we both predicted it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
I'm not big.
yeah, St Jude. So St Jude, the incumbent here was Judith Smythe on Labour, but the results returning Denise Perry for the Lib Dems with 1,654 votes, so 42% of the vote share. Judith Smythe in second place, 795 with 20%, with Reform in third at 670 and 17%. Greens in fourth, with 16%, and the Conservatives in fifth with 5. Yeah, again, another ward where there hadn't previously been a Reform candidate. So to go from a standing start, and even the PIP hadn't done very well in 2024. They've got less than 200 votes here. But to go from that to 670, that's quite quite a thing. But again, a Labour incumbent seemingly damaged by the national picture.
Yeah, and another Portsmouth South where the Lib Dem vote has come on strong.
Yes.
So turnout and then finally St
Yes.
Tom.
So turnout 2024 was 33.6%, and in 2026 it was 42.9. So again up by around 10 percentage points, but not as high as, so kind of around the median increase of the votes there. So an interesting thing there. So remember that the votes was 1,654, and then when I go to and we'd both predicted that Sir Jude would go this way, but then when we go to St Thomas, with the incumbent there being Mark Jeffrey in the Liberal Dems. This being all three being Lib Dems in this ward. Mark being returned with 1,646 votes, 43%. So I just thought it was interesting that actually the two wards that are
Yeah.
geographically right next to each other, both returned a Lib Dem with the number of votes actually being very, very close together. But the second place here being Reform with 784 votes at 21%. So quite a distance from the
Yeah.
Lib Dems, but still to take them to second, Labour going down from second in 2024 to fourth, with Greens taking third place with 666 votes at 18%. Quite a change there. The turnout 25.2 in 2024 and 33.3 on Thursday. So again, an increase, but that's an even smaller increase than some of the other wards. But nonetheless, just clear miles between
Mm.
the Lib Dems and the second place there.
So when all of that moving and shaking has happened, what does the council look like now?
So the council now looks like. Oh, sorry. Let me just. So we went from a situation where we had 18. So before Thursday, we had 18 Lib Dems. We had 10 Reform, nine Labour, 4 Conservative, 1 Independent, and that's now 22 Lib Dems. So for those of you with a Taylor Swift inkling, that's why we kind of named the episode. Don't know about you, but it feels like 22.
Yeah,
So
beautiful off
that
her
takes
Red
them
album.
into the
Yep.
majority. So with there being 42 councillors on Portsmouth City Council, 22 gives them a majority, which is I think the first time since 2014.
Mm.
But taking the Conservatives down to 3 seats, Labour down to 4, but Reform obviously cleaning up the rest. So quite a big night there. So that was how that kind of worked. Just before we kind of look at how our predictions kind of worked out. The other thing that I did want to say was was about actually how the difference was between the north and south of the city.
Mm.
So if you look at percentage terms in Portsmouth North, it was just under 42% Reform, and 19% Labour. 19% Lib Dem, with Labour and the Conservatives kind of very, very close around the 15% mark, and then Greens coming up to just over 10%. But in Portsmouth
Mm.
South, Lib Dems just under 41%, with Reform at 22.8%, and the Greens in third place there with 16.4%, and Labour in fourth place for the vote share in Portsmouth South. Now, considering both constituencies have Labour MPs, And this
Mm.
is just this is just a sum of the wards that are actually in those two different
Yeah.
constituencies. But it was just interesting to see how that split out. But yeah, overall vote share 32.5% Reform, just under 30% Lib Dem, Labour in third with 14%, and the Greens in fourth with 13. But the Conservatives, bearing in mind in years gone, they were they used to be running the council before 2018, less than 11% of the vote share. So quite a quite a change in fortunes in that 5 years.
Yeah, and I think when and let's be honest, the Conservative vote has been collapsing for the last 4 years. This is not, whilst if I look at this in terms of badness to goodness,
Mm.
it was the biggest losers on the night were Labour. Four sitting councillors all wiped out, often beaten into third or fourth place. That the national impact has hurt them really badly. The Conservatives have had a bad night. The fact they retained one of their two councillors, I think, was a decent result for them. But elsewhere, we've talked about it before. Um, their votes are almost irrelevant. Now the Greens are a funny one, isn't it? Because I'd say they had an okay night. Um, one second place finish, but quite distant. Um, they don't seem to target anywhere. They've kind of picked up votes all over the place. You could argue that in a couple they've perhaps split the vote. And I would argue in Cosham they've given Reform a little bit of a leg up into that role. Reform is the funny one because if you look at their votes, they're the most popular party in Portsmouth.
Mm.
Their vote share's gone up. Vote share's colossal. They were, first or second in most wards. There were a lot of support for them, but I don't think they'll be pleased with their night's work
Well,
because
I thought. Oh, sorry, gone.
predictions were that they would win between 6 and 10 wards. And I think some of the folk within Reform were even predicting 10 or 12. And I think if we go out 6, 8 weeks, you could almost have made a credible argument that at some point there was even fanciful talk they could win all 14.
I mean, there was. I mean, to be honest, there was. I mean, there was talk on social media that was what they were thinking, but that obviously, like many things on social media, that's taken with enough pinches of salt to you need to see,
Fanciful,
you
yeah.
need to see a doctor. But the interesting thing for me was when you look at actually when you look at how they did in Hilsey, you know, more than 1,000 votes between them and anyone else, and how they did in Paulsgrove, where there's more than 1,500 votes again between them and anyone else. They almost overperformed in those wards, and had actually some of that could that have turned into if you look at like places like Nelson, where there was 150 votes in it, or other places where they were actually in closer contention. Drayton and Farlington, they were that close in it. If they'd have put,
Yep.
could that have been a different story? Had not wishing to give any party campaign advice, but it's they could have actually had some different results. In Baffins, in Drayton and Farlington, had
Well,
perhaps some of that. So it was interesting to see that. That actually, and obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's very, very easy to sit here as an armchair political strategist and say that. But when you look at it afterwards, there were some places
well,
where they could have redirected some of that energy in it, and it would have got them
well,
probably another two
well,
wards.
well, let me be playful with you, Simon, because I know you
Okay.
always love this thing. So
Hmm.
if I give them an extra 150 votes
Yeah.
in every ward,
Yeah.
they go from winning 5 to winning 8.
Yeah.
because they win Drayton and Farlington, they win Baffins,
Yeah,
and they win Fratton. Delighted, absolutely turning cartwheels, aren't they?
yeah,
At that point, if I take 150 votes
yeah.
from them, they lose Cosham and they lose Charles Dickens. And I think if they had only won 3 wards, that would have been an absolute disaster for them.
Yes, it would certainly have been a very different night for them. So I just find that kind of interesting when there's no way to kind of get away. They've had a good night, but it certainly
Of course they
wasn't
have.
as much of a walk in the park as you kind of see in other places in the across the country, or indeed in
Well,
certain
it,
other
it,
places.
if we just look across the harbour, and I haven't got
Mm,
the exact figures, but in Gosport, the Lib Dems got splattered, to use the politically technical term,
yeah.
and Reform absolutely romped it. So there is definitely a difference in local politics, which as we move into LRG, but I think we do have to pause for thought. And it was such a good night for the Liberal Democrats that
Hmm.
Ed Davey was down by 9 o'clock the next morning, which I'm absolutely certain, and we will not reveal our sources, that as we stood in Guildhall Square at 04:20 with
Waiting for a taxi. Yeah.
waiting for a taxi with a well-known Liberal, delighted they were at the prospect of having to be there for a
Been down the
photo opportunity,
seafront
or down the
in the
seafront for a Ed Davies coffee truck, wake up and smell the coffee at 9 o'clock. But
yeah.
they would. I think they were the big winners on the night. Whilst you predicted it, and you can feel absolutely jolly with yourself, we both know your liberal Democrat leaning tendencies means you're always over optimistic, and I'm not sure in your heart of hearts you saw them getting 22, but that's what they got, and the night is theirs.
It was indeed. Just to quickly kind of go through the predictions, because I think we'd kind of misremembered a couple of them, just to confirm. So we'd pretty much agreed on every ward except for Cosham and Nelson. My apologies, it wasn't Fratton and it wasn't Charles Dickens. So you'd predicted that Reform would win in Cosham, and I'd predicted that Labour would win. And in Nelson, you'd predicted that Reform would win, and I'd predicted that the Lib Dems would retain the ward if you compare it to who was elected, which party
Yeah.
was successful in 2022. So it was interesting that we were both one ward out. But yeah, in the way mine added up, it did end up with a Lib Dem majority, which was a surprise when my spreadsheet spat that out once I'd kind of figured them. But that was where it got to from what I was thinking would happen in the others. So it was interesting. Yeah, it was a night of some very different stories. Some surprises or some sad departures for some very hardworking and very well respected councillors that were hit by impacts of issues naturally. What doesn't kind of come across in the way we've described it tonight is, of course, Cosham. The result for Cosham came out was it about 1:45?
Yep. Yep.
So that was declared, and then there was a good probably hour and a half until the
Yep.
others came out, and then they came out in kind of thick succession. So if you think that actually the Cosham result was the first thing we saw for over an hour, that looked like a very different picture for the evening, obviously with only one data point. But that looked like things were going to go a completely different way. So it was interesting to see how people held their nerve as to how the others were going to come out.
So I think the important thing is that the Lib Dems will continue to run the council, but now with an outright majority, which I don't think makes pretty much any difference to them. I think Reform are the now clearly the second party in the chamber, whereas they were only just ahead of Labour.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as we're almost out of time, we can't really reflect on what this means nationally.
No.
But we will, I'm sure, get some insight into our last show of the season, which will be next Sunday. But as for this evening, you've been listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury, so thank you very much for following on. Please do make sure you give us a like, follow, subscribe, etc., or send biscuits if you've got any, because that's quite handy. We won't turn them down. The next elections in Portsmouth will be, well, so far, unless someone changes their mind, will be the all-ups for the LGR, for the Shadow Council, for the new authority that will come into effect in 2028. So join us next Sunday, 6:27, and we'll see you there. Oh, actually, if there's PMQs on Wednesday, we're doing PMQs.
Oh, let's do PMQs. Let's do
Yeah,
PMQs. So
let's
see
see
you on
whether
Wednesday.
we've had a change of prime minister by then. Okay, we'll see you then.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.